November 17th, 1993, under the lights at the Parc des Princes. It was the final 1994 World Cup qualifying game for France and Bulgaria. With Sweden already qualified, everything was at stake. For the victors, 1994 World Cup qualification was guaranteed. For the losers, nothing. It was France who took a 1-0 lead after 31 minutes, after Ballon d'Or winning Marseille star Jean-Pierre Papin knocked the ball down to that year's Ballon d'Or bronze medalist, Eric Cantona, who fired a fierce shot into the back of the net. This was a star-studded France team, complemented by the likes of Deschamps, Petit, Desailly, Blanc and Ginola. 4 years later, captained by Deschamps, France didn't just qualify for the World Cup, they won it. Bulgaria had stars all of their own though, future Ballon d'Or winner Hristo Stoichkov foremost among them. Within 6 minutes, Emil Kostadinov had them level, and in the 90th minute, Kostadinov struck again, blasting a thunderous shot past a helpless Bernard Lama in the France goal. Bulgaria had qualified for the World Cup many times before, but something about this team just felt different. And so it proved. At USA 94, Bulgaria beat Greece, Argentina, Mexico and Germany en route to a first ever semi-final, where only the individual brilliance of a Roberto Baggio brace could end their historic run. These players, Borislav Mihailov in goal, Jordan Lechkov in midfield, Nasko Sirikov up front, the talisman Hristo Stoichkov, and the man who got them there, Emil Kostadinov, ought to be hailed as national heroes. The pride of Bulgaria. And for at least the next 10 years, they were. Now Bulgarian football finds itself in a very different place though. Bulgaria's top flight has become a joke, ranked 4 places below the Cypriot First Division by UEFA coefficients, with even most Bulgarians having lost interest in it, primarily due to a belief, and a valid one at that games are rigged and none of it's real. The nation's biggest clubs are owned and operated by Mafia bosses, gangsters, and other assorted bandits, who are routinely killed, and the Bulgarian Football Union is locked in a bitter competition with the government to see which festering swamp of corruption can become more hated by the Bulgarian people. In fact, that might just be the only contest in Bulgaria that isn't rigged. They are both going hell for leather in pursuit of that crown. The end result is a national team ranked 81st in the world, below Cape Verde, Oman and China, which finished bottom of its group in Euro 2024 qualifying and didn't win a single game in 2023, despite playing against Montenegro, Albania and Lithuania twice. A reminder, at this stage, that this is a national team which finished 4th at the 1994 World Cup and was ranked 8th in the world in 1995, above Portugal, France, Argentina and the Netherlands. The sadness for Bulgarians is not only that football in their country has been ruined by a bunch of duplicitous crooks at club, international, youth and even amateur level, but that some of the key figures from their golden team in the 1990s have been at the forefront of their corruption-plagued collapse. I've made a lot of videos on this channel about corruption in football, from Trinidad and Tobago to Tajikistan, the latter of which I described as being the most corrupt football league in the world. I would stand by that, but Tajikistan is a totalitarian dictatorship, sometimes likened to North Korea, with very little football pedigree. Bulgaria, by contrast, is supposed to be a democracy, a member of the European Union, and a former power within international football. And yet, the degree of criminality, corruption, and outright disdain for fans in Bulgarian football is as extraordinary as almost anything else that I've ever researched, written about, or reported on. So sit back, relax, and join me on a journey to Bulgaria, a nation of ancient history, stunning landscapes, and beautiful Black Sea coastlines, as we take a look at the ugliest side of Bulgarian culture. And no, I'm not referring to Chalga, but rather how organised crime has destroyed a once proud footballing nation. Corruption in Bulgaria is nothing new. It was rife in the People's Republic of Bulgaria, under the Bulgarian Communist Party, and has only gotten worse since the collapse of state socialism. Bulgaria modelled itself on the Soviet Union, both in formation and in dissolution. transformed from an agrarian peasant society into an industrialised and urbanised socialist republic following World War II. During the 1990s, when the People's Republic of Bulgaria was dissolved, Bulgaria attempted to democratise and integrate into the global capitalist system through shock therapy. It wrought devastation, particularly in rural areas. Unemployment skyrocketed, the agricultural sector was decimated, and huge numbers of people just left. Bulgaria is believed to have experienced the fastest rate of depopulation of any country in Europe during the post-Soviet era, leaving behind a sense of abandonment from which Bulgaria still hasn't recovered. As in the Soviet Union, Bulgaria's businesses and industries were bought up by a small number of wealthy individuals who had either accumulated their wealth through crime, were well connected with politicians, or, and it should be said, in most instances, both of the above. Football clubs were no exception, previously administered by the state, with the big clubs sometimes tied and both operated and funded by a single state entity, as in the case of CSKA Sofia with the army, or Lokomotiv Plovdiv with the railways. When Bulgaria's biggest football clubs were put on the free market, they were hoovered up by the nation's new oligarchical barons. Though the previous system was far from perfect, with players having few freedoms, especially when it came to leaving Bulgaria if they received an offer from abroad, and persistent allegations of favouritism towards certain more powerful and better connected clubs, it also had its advantages. Because clubs were funded by the state or local administration, they tended to spend within their means and rarely collapsed, as has become routine now among even Bulgaria's biggest clubs. Furthermore, since the state was in charge of everything and had an active interest not only in improving the standard of Bulgarian football to benefit the national team for domestic and international purposes, but also to get kids into the sport, both for their own health and to keep them out of trouble. Under the new system, albeit not overnight, everything changed. It takes a lot of money to run a football club, and the only people in Bulgaria who had any money at the time were corrupt politicians, mafia bosses, and corrupt politicians who were also mafia bosses. The state's motives in football might not have been entirely benevolent, but they were a lot less sinister than drug dealers, cigarette smugglers, and pimps, who have very little interest, it would seem, in preserving or raising the standard of Bulgarian football, or nurturing the next generation of players and providing opportunities to youngsters. It should be said, not all of this was instant. Of course, it was following the dissolution of the People's Republic of Bulgaria that the newly founded Republic of Bulgaria finished fourth at the 1994 World Cup. This was supposed to be a brave new world, free from the fear and conflict of the Cold War era, and though economic, political and social chaos ensued, sport appeared to present a rare ray of light. In reality, however, all of Bulgaria's immortal World Cup heroes were a product of that previous, now bygone era. When Bulgaria joined the supposed free world, as with most Eastern Bloc countries, there was an exodus of their best footballers. At the start of the 1990s, Petar Hubchev and Jordan Lechkov went to Hamburg, Emil Kostadinov joined Porto, and Bulgaria's main man, Hristo Stoichkov, was snapped up by Barcelona. It was great for those players, who were able to massively increase their earnings and play in Europe's top leagues for some of the continent's biggest clubs, but it led to an inevitable decline in the standard of domestic football in Bulgaria. Again, the impact wasn't immediate, but rather, it was more of a slow puncture throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. CSKA Sofia reached the quarterfinals of the European Cup, now the Champions League, for a sixth time in 1990, the year before the People's Republic of Bulgaria was dissolved, having twice reached the semi-finals. And no Bulgarian team has ever played a knockout game since the competition was revamped and rebranded as the UEFA Champions League. There was one last hurrah for Bulgarian football in 2006 when Levski Sofia overcame Serie A side Udinese in the round of 16 to make it through to the quarterfinals of what was then the UEFA Cup, since renamed the Europa League, but by this stage, the rot had already set in. As far as some are concerned, that rot has a name, Borislav Mihailov, who became president of the Bulgarian Football Union in 2005. If Mihailov's name rings a bell and you are neither Bulgarian nor over the age of 40, that's probably because I mentioned him in the introduction. Mihailov was Bulgaria's goalkeeper at the 1994 World Cup and throughout the country's golden era, racking up some 102 caps for the Lions. That was an all-time record when Mihailov finally hung up his gloves, and it has only been exceeded by one player since, namely Stilian Petrov. Mihailov is nicknamed the Whig in Bulgaria. I will just let you take a wild guess at why, and upon his appointment, it was hoped that he, along with other legends from that 1994 team, like Yordan Lechkov who became his vice president, could breathe new life into Bulgarian football. Mihailov and his gang of bandits have, in fact, had the precise opposite effect. Hideously corrupt and grossly incompetent, Mihailov's reign as BFU president has been blighted by a series of scandals. On his watch, Bulgarian football has become among the least trusted in Europe in terms of match fixing and corruption. Meanwhile, the standard of football has become a joke. It would be wrong to blame all of Bulgaria's plight on Mihailov and his acolytes, but the timing speaks volumes. The last major tournament Bulgaria qualified for, albeit they were knocked out in the group stage having lost all 3 games, was Euro 2004. Mihailov was elected in 2005, replacing communist-era sports boss Ivan Slavkov, having been vice president since 2001. Although Bulgaria had already fallen a long way from their mid-90s peak by 2005, they were still ranked 37th in the world and had some exciting players to give them hope. The holy trinity of Martin Petrov, Stan Petrov, and the golden boy Dimitar Berbatov, all 3 of whom would go on to star in the Premier League, were all in their early to mid-20s. Meanwhile, a teenage Valery Bozhinov was making waves at Lecce and had gone to Euro 2004 as only an 18-year-old. Not only did Bulgaria fail to qualify for a single tournament with those players, or since all 3 have retired, but they haven't produced a single top-class player equivalent to any of them in more than 20 years. We have now reached a stage in which there isn't a single Bulgarian player in any of Europe's top 5 leagues. Bulgaria's most promising players no longer go to Germany or England, but to Russia, Turkey or Greece. Meanwhile, half of the national team squad play domestic football in Bulgaria. That's a big problem for the national team because Bulgaria's top flight has been systemically dismantled and ravaged by crises. Since the early 2000s, the Bulgarian First League has become known as the football owner murder capital of the world. No, you heard that right, the football club owner murder capital of the world. Between 2003 and 2013, 15 owners were assassinated in the space of 10 years. Lokomotiv Plovdiv, who won their first and only league title in 2004, had 3 presidents killed in the space of just 2 years. It became the case that football presidents in Bulgaria had about the same life expectancy as Japanese kamikaze pilots during World War II. Bulgarian clubs and the BFU like to present these deaths as tragedies and freak acts of misfortune. But in reality, they were routine contract killings of the type that are not uncommon in organised crime. It's important to give some context to the scale of corruption and mafia influence in Bulgarian life. The richest person in Bulgaria, or at least the richest until recently, Vasil Boshkov, who is estimated to be worth more than $1 billion, is literally nicknamed the Skull. Again, though more sinister than the Whig, it's one of those nicknames that doesn't require much of an explanation. In documents released by WikiLeaks in 2009, Boshkov was described by the US State Department as, quote, the most infamous gangster in Bulgaria, active in money laundering, privatization fraud, threats, extortion, racketeering, and various illegal trades. Boshkov spent 3 years living in self-exile in Dubai from 2020, following a fallout with Bulgaria's Prime Minister Boyko Borisov. If you're thinking that must make Borisov one of the good guys, well, I've got some bad news for you. In fact, Boshkov returned to Bulgaria from Dubai because he wanted to give witness and testify against Borisov, who he claimed had been blackmailing him for several years. As soon as he touched back down in Sofia, Boshkov, who is charged with contract killings, extortion, and hundreds of millions in unpaid taxes on his gambling businesses, was arrested and taken in for questioning. Also accused of being an associate of former Wagner Group boss Yevgeny Prigozhin, who met an unfortunate end last August, R.I.P. Bozo, Boshkov has political ambitions all of his own. While in exile, Boshkov launched his own political party, Bulgarian Summer, which brands itself, and hey, don't laugh, as an anti-corruption party. Bulgarian Summer received about 2% of the vote in Bulgaria's 2021 parliamentary elections. Unsurprisingly, given his wealth, interest in the gambling industry, and the fact that he's a crook, like all self-respecting organised crime bosses in Bulgaria, Boshkov has been heavily involved in football. In 1999, he bought CSKA Sofia, Bulgaria's biggest and most successful club, winning 2 league titles before selling to Indian businessman Pramod Mittal. The brother of steel magnate and billionaire Lakshmi Mittal, Pramod once spent $82 million on his daughter's wedding, but was declared bankrupt a few years ago. In 2019, Boshkov revisited his interest in Bulgarian football, acquiring CSKA Sofia's bitter rivals Levski Sofia, with whom they contest the so-called Eternal Derby. Club allegiances seemingly aren't all that important to Bulgarian gangsters. In Boshkov's sole full season owning Levski, in which he claimed to have invested more than £10 million in the club, they finished 4th. The Skull subsequently transferred his ownership of Levski over to Nasko Sirikov, another tarnished legend of Bulgaria's 1994 World Cup team, who has since been accused of stealing shares as Levski fans attempt to wrestle back control of their club. It probably won't surprise you all that much either at this stage to discover that Bulgaria's not-so-squeaky-clean longtime Prime Minister, Boyko Borisov, has also been heavily involved, or at least interested in football. Borisov is actually officially the oldest professional footballer in the history of the Bulgarian game, having represented FC Vitosha in Bulgaria's 2nd division in 2013 at the age of 54. Just 2 years earlier, while still in his 50s, Borisov curiously saw off the competition of then Manchester United star Dimitar Berbatov, who won the Premier League Golden Boot and a Premier League title that season, as well as reaching a Champions League final, to be named as Bulgaria's Footballer of the Year. Borisov later called for the award to be annulled. Elected as a supposed man of the people in 2009, Borisov's popularity soon began to wane, so he decided to take matters into his own hands. Bulgaria's 2013, 2015, and 2019 parliamentary elections were all overshadowed by allegations of fraud. Meanwhile, Borisov was personally accused of threatening and attacking journalists. Under Borisov, Bulgaria dropped to the foot of the European Union's press freedoms rankings, which is, incidentally, also where they rank economically. Not everyone is struggling in Bulgaria though. The likes of Borisov are living very well. I've told this anecdote before, either in my video about CSKA Sofia or the one about Ludogorets Razgrad, I can't quite remember, but a Bulgarian friend of mine at school, this will have been in 2012 or 2013, when asked what Bulgaria's Prime Minister was like by our history teacher, simply replied, "He is Mafia." I could, of course, go into great detail about all of Borisov's ties to organised crime, but that would be a long, laborious, and ultimately unnecessary exercise when those 3 words sum it up far more eloquently than I ever could. Also, since he saw it last time and messaged me after 10 years, if you happen to be watching this, hi Stefan, hope you're well. Borisov positioned himself as being in opposition to Mikhailov and the Bulgarian Football Union, but only through political cynicism, as the BFU had become so toxic, and opposing them a cost-free exercise. In 2018, working with Mikhailov, Bulgaria bid to host Euro 2028 and the 2030 World Cup, jointly with Greece, Romania and Serbia, or the Alliance of Laughably Corrupt Football Federations, as it was officially known. No, not really. The bid collapsed when Greece secretly bid to host the 2030 World Cup with Egypt and Saudi Arabia instead, as the Saudis needed a European partner in a not very convincing attempt to circumvent FIFA regulations. Amusingly, Saudi Arabia then went behind Greece's back, doing a deal with FIFA to retract their bid to jointly host the 2030 World Cup, giving FIFA's bizarro Portugal, Spain, Morocco, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay bid a clear run, therefore allowing Saudi Arabia to host independently in 2034, and leaving Greece, just like Serbia, Romania, and Bulgaria, with absolutely nothing. In the 2016 Bulgarian presidential elections, Borisov's preferred candidate, Setska Sakeva from his party Gerb, was defeated by independent candidate Rumen Radev. Radev positioned himself as another anti-corruption candidate. You may be starting to notice something of a theme here, and as someone who is deeply corrupt, Borisov took great offence at that. Borisov and Radev subsequently became bitter political rivals, and with much of Borisov's political goodwill having been eroded, pressure on him began to mount. That pressure culminated in mass protests in 2020 and 2021, spanning for almost 300 days, and resulting in an unprecedented political crisis. Borisov's 12-year prime ministership came to an end in 2021 when his 4-year cabinet ended and Parliament accepted the resignation of his third government. Despite having been questioned and detained for misuse of EU funds, Borisov has so far avoided any serious punishment, and in Bulgaria's most recent 2023 parliamentary elections, his two-party coalition won 25% of the vote, which was more than any other coalition. Because Borisov has become so toxic, however, the other parties refuse to form any coalition with him at the head. Bulgarian politics has basically been deadlocked since 2021 then, with Nikolai Denkov having become Prime Minister in 2023 after a coalition deal was finally struck. Throughout this time, Bulgarian football has echoed a lot of the same problems as the nation at large, often in even more comical fashion. Borislav Mihailov has hung on to power for even longer and by even more nefarious means than Borisov himself, and the misuse of funds was less of an accusation and more of a business model. The Bulgarian Football Union operates effectively with a one-member, one-vote system, and the union has a total of more than 500 member clubs. That means that a wholly amateur, unknown, or phantom club, as some Bulgarians have begun to refer to them, has the same voting powers as CSKA or Levski Sofia. Mihailov managed, for a very long time, to retain the support of some big clubs, most notably his own former club, Levski Sofia, who the BFU was routinely accused of showing favouritism towards on his watch, but primarily, it was these ever-expanding phantom clubs that allowed Mihailov to keep winning elections. Although, it should be said, with varying degrees of ease. Mihailov was long surrounded by a cadre of equally unscrupulous characters, poisoning, in effect, the entire BFU. Mihailov then only needed to buy, and I use that word very deliberately, the support of over 50% of the BFU's 508 member clubs, who each have one vote in order to win elections. Conveniently for Mihailov, many of the administrators of these phantom clubs would sell their firstborn child in exchange for a packet of cigarettes, so guaranteeing their votes often wasn't a particularly challenging task. At this point, it's worth noting that one or two of you, especially if you're England fans, may be watching this and thinking, hang on a minute, I'm sure the president of the Bulgarian Football Union resigned in 2019 after a load of Bulgaria fans racially abused England's black players in Sofia, and you would be right. Or at least, so everyone thought. Basically, although everyone in Bulgaria has known Mihailov and the BFU to be corrupt and incompetent for a very long time, it was something which hadn't really attracted much international attention. UEFA, for example, don't really care about the integrity or scruples of associations or their presidents, so long as they are independent from government, which the BFU was, particularly after Borisov publicly began to oppose them, and the current UEFA president enjoys their support. That was very firmly true in the case of Mihailov, given that he was elected to UEFA's executive committee in 2011 and actually still sits on the committee now. The way in which the BFU mishandled their racism scandal in 2019, though, in a game that Bulgaria lost 4-0 against England, piqued the interest of a lot of the world's press. Uncomfortable questions started to be asked of the BFU and of Mihailov, so to take the heat off both of them, Mihailov officially resigned. It was actually very successful, in the sense that the stories died down as soon as Mikhailov stepped down. As far as the hounds in the English press and beyond were concerned, they'd got their man. This was a one-week story, time to move on. In Bulgaria, meanwhile, nothing actually changed. Mihailov's deputy and close ally Mikhail Kasabov took the reins in his absence, as Mikhailov basically just went on an 18-month vacation. In 2021, when another, less tainted legend of the Bulgarian game, Dimitar Berbatov, announced his intention to run in the Bulgarian Football Union's upcoming presidential election, Mikhailov rapidly emerged from the shadows, stating that his resignation was never formally accepted and announcing that he would therefore be assuming the role once again. Mikhailov led a bitter presidential campaign against Berbatov, even kicking village teams who supported Berbatov's presidency out of the amateur leagues in order to deny them from voting. 15 delegates were also unable to attend the vote due to alleged paperwork issues, all 15 of whom, purely coincidentally I have no doubt, were going to vote for Berbatov. The end result was that Mikhailov won exactly 51% of the vote, securing another 4-year term. Incidentally, Mikhailov only won 241 votes, rather than the 242 required, for the 50% plus 1 vote minimum threshold, meaning that a balloted runoff between him and Berbatov ought to have been triggered in order to determine the presidency. No such election ever happened though, so Berbatov challenged the election in the courts and won. Ultimately, however, it wouldn't be Berbatov who would dethrone Mikhailov, but the sheer weight of public dissatisfaction and hatred. Bulgaria are in horrific form. They didn't win a single game in 2023 or in Euro 2024 qualifying, finishing bottom of their group and a 2-0 defeat at home to Lithuania in October. A nation of fewer than 3 million people where football isn't even the most popular sport, felt like an all-time low. If there's one lesson Bulgarian football fans have learnt in recent years though, it's that things can always get worse. Sure enough, the following month, there was a new low. Just days before Bulgaria was set to host Hungary in a Euro 2024 qualifier, it was still unclear where the game would be played or whether it would go ahead at all. The BFU claimed that the match couldn't be played in Sofia owing to security concerns issued by the police. It later transpired that the police had only issued those concerns upon the BFU's own request. The BFU said that the game would be played in Plovdiv instead, but the mayor of Plovdiv denied that this was the case, stating that Plovdiv Stadium wasn't ready yet and heavy construction work was due over the relevant international break. The BFU then claimed that the game would instead be played in Kardzeli at an 11,000-seater stadium over 3 hours away from Sofia and over 2.5 hours from Plovdiv, which was confirmed by the mayor of Kardzeli. This, however, wasn't even UEFA compliant, since UEFA rules state that all host venues must be within 90 minutes of an international airport, which Kardzeli Stadium wasn't. In the end, the game was played in Sofia, but behind closed doors, owing to the so-called safety concerns that the BFU had cited as the reason for not playing the game in Sofia to begin with. The whole fiasco saw anger at the BFU and at Mikhailov come to a head, and over 4,000 fans made their way outside of the stadium, regardless to stage a protest. The protest soon turned violent as rubbish bins were set ablaze, and the police responded with water cannons, and in the ensuing melee, more than 20 fans and 5 police officers were injured, with 4 fans admitted to hospital with serious injuries. It was, incidentally, just 1 day off being the 28th anniversary of Bulgaria's famous 2-1 win in Paris that secured them 1994 World Cup qualification. The pressure on Mikhailov and the sheer level of anger at the BFU became so great following the protests that even Levski Sofia publicly turned on him, and that was probably the final nail in Mihailov's coffin. He has been replaced temporarily, once again, by his former deputy and ally Mikhail Kasabov, with new elections scheduled for March 2024. Dimitar Berbatov has said that he plans to run again. There are lots of countries with corrupt football associations who still produce great players. But what makes Bulgaria almost unique is how endemic the corruption is at virtually every level of the game. When state socialism collapsed in Bulgaria and was replaced by free markets, the previous system of state-run sports and football schools was dismantled, but nothing replaced it. The remaining youth team infrastructure at clubs, meanwhile, has been neglected, corrupted, underfunded, and left to rot. Bulgaria isn't a wealthy country, but even in the region, compared to its peers, it has just about the worst youth facilities and among the fewest qualified coaches, and it shows in Bulgaria's current player pool. Bulgaria's top teams, and indeed most of the Bulgarian First League, have increasingly neglected nurturing their own talent in favour of importing foreign players over the last couple of decades, believing it to be a cheaper and easier alternative. Ludogorets Razgrad, who have won the last 12 Bulgarian First League titles on the bounce, only have 5 Bulgarian players in their entire 25-man squad. They have 4 players from Brazil alone, and it has been more in the past. Players from Africa and South America view Bulgaria as an attractive stopgap en route to Europe's most prestigious leagues due to the ease of getting visas and ultimately citizenship, allowing them to join clubs in England, Germany, France or Italy more easily without any issues relating to their paperwork. It is a controversial topic in Bulgaria, unsurprisingly, given the fact that it has coincided with the decimating of youth team football in Bulgaria, which has become riddled with nepotism besides other things. Both nepotism and crumbling infrastructure and facilities are issues that aren't unique to the youth team game though. Plovdiv Stadium, the largest football stadium in Bulgaria, with a capacity of 55,000, is in a dire state. With no UEFA licence and not even functioning floodlights, it has been reduced to hosting junior games and third division fixtures, which are lucky to attract 100 or so fans. It may be the most extreme example, but it's far from an isolated incident. As for weapons-grade nepotism, well, Borislav Mihailov's father was also a Levski Sofia legend who represented Bulgaria, namely Biza Mihailov, as is his own son, Nikolai Mihailov, who captains Levski now and represented Bulgaria 46 times, while his father was BFU president between 2006 and 2022. It has long been suspected, particularly when Nikolai was winning caps for Bulgaria, despite not even playing at club level, that perhaps those two things might have been related. The crumbling state of Bulgarian football stadiums and shocking decline in standards have contributed to a steep decline in attendances, though not as much as the fundamental mistrust among supporters that what they are witnessing is even real. The degree of corruption and match fixing in the Bulgarian game for an awfully long time now has been farcical. This isn't even denied by Bulgaria's own clubs and several officials. 5 years ago, and if you don't laugh at this, then you'll cry, Prime Minister Boyko Borisov and the owners of Bulgaria's biggest clubs held a meeting, after which controversial CSKA Sofia majority shareholder Grisha Ganchev released a statement which read, quote, "We agreed. Hopefully, it will be the last time and there will be fair play. We agreed not to buy matches, not to buy referees, not to break teams and so on. Let there be full fair play and let the best win." End quote. No, really, you did hear me right there. The owners of Bulgaria's biggest clubs and the Prime Minister genuinely released a statement announcing that there would be no more fixed games or bought referees. Romania's biggest clubs actually had a similar meeting and revelation a few years earlier, which lasted for all of one season. Bulgaria's lasted for about 5 minutes. In fact, I don't think the door had shut for the meeting, and one of them had already revealed that they'd had their fingers crossed behind their backs. The collapse of Bulgaria's biggest clubs, not helped by their dodgy owners routinely being killed, and their usurping by village clubs with virtually no fans but wealthy benefactors, has further undermined what was once a serious league. The aforementioned CSKA Sofia shareholder, Grisha Ganchev, was, for a long time, the owner of rival club PFC Litex Lovech. Ganchev bought Litex, who are based in a city of fewer than 30,000 people, in 1996, and immediately began investing heavily in the club. In his first season, Litex won promotion, and in his second, they won their first ever Bulgarian First League title, usurping Levski and CSKA Sofia. 3 more titles would follow in 1999, 2010 and 2011, along with 4 Bulgarian Cups, and Litex even twice made it through to the knockout stages of the UEFA Cup. In 2016, however, when CSKA Sofia were threatened with expulsion from the league and relegation to the third tier owing to their financial woes, Ganchev found an elegant solution. He would rename HITC Sevens as CSKA Sofia and simply continue playing in the top flight as CSKA. Unsurprisingly, this wasn't a particularly smooth transition. Some angered CSKA fans founded a new club, FC CSKA 1948 Sofia, claiming to be the real CSKA and, initially at least, putting a focus on homegrown players. There are now, as I covered in an entire video should any of you be interested in this, two clubs who claim to be the real CSKA Sofia, and they finished second and third in the Bulgarian First League last season. At the same time as all of this was happening, CSKA's rivals Levski Sofia were also in an economic crisis. It was at this point that former CSKA owner and Bulgaria's wealthiest individual, that's right, the Skull himself, Vasil Božkov, bought the club, later claiming to have done so only because he was threatened by Prime Minister Boyko Borisov. CSKA and Levski Sofia are the two most notable examples, as Bulgaria's two biggest clubs, but every one of Bulgaria's more traditionally established teams has been hit with some kind of scandal or catastrophe since the turn of the millennium. Two-time Bulgarian First League champions Botev Plovdiv imploded under the ownership of Dimitar Hristolov during the 2000s and were administratively relegated from the first to the third tier in 2010. Three-time champions Lokomotiv Sofia suffered a similar fate when they were relegated to the third tier in 2015 due to unpaid debts, just a year after finishing third in the top flight and competing in the UEFA Cup, but their problems went from bad to worse when they were denied even of a third tier license and were liquidated, meaning that they had to be refounded and start out in the fourth division. And four-time Bulgarian champions HITC Sevens were taken over by Grisha Ganchev's son after his father fled for CSKA, and they were administratively relegated also to the third tier in 2017, and are still only in the second league now. In the meantime, Ludogorets Razgrad, who I have also made an entire video about, thanks solely to the extraordinary funding of owner Kirill Domasheyev, have become the dominant force in Bulgarian football. And when I say the dominant force, he bought them in 2010, they won promotion in his first season, they then won the Bulgarian First League title in their first ever top flight campaign, and they have won it every single season since. That is 12 years in a row. Despite that success, and owing to the fact that Ludogorets have had little football tradition before that, and Razgrad has a population of fewer than 30,000 people, Ludogorets are still just about the worst supported team in the division, averaging about 1,000 fans at their home games. As crowds in Bulgaria have dwindled, with football fans often paying more attention to foreign leagues, in which they at least felt that they could trust the integrity of games and results, unlike at home, the makeup of crowds has also significantly changed. Which set of fans is less moved by the actual football? Well, hooligans, racists, and thugs, of course. Some interesting tattoos there, I'm sure you'd agree. Further tarnishing the reputation of Bulgarian football, as the world saw against England in 2019, though that was far from an isolated incident. It's also worth noting that violence and racism are far from being the preserve of fans on the terraces. Bulgarian football club owners, as we know by now, are in a kill or be killed business owing to their ties to organised crime. Meanwhile, the BFU has routinely displayed fairly explicit racism. Georgi Ivanov, another now hated former Bulgarian international who won 34 caps between 1996 and 2004, is now the technical director of the Bulgarian national team. Almost exactly a year ago, he stated that so long as he was in charge, no non-white player would ever represent Bulgaria. Now, that might seem a bit racist, what with it being massively racist and all, but also, while he is in charge, Bulgaria aren't going to win any games, therefore showing respect and goodwill to all people from all nationalities. Well, except for Bulgarians, I suppose. When you factor in Bulgaria's worrying demographic pyramid, there were around 150,000 births a year in Bulgaria when Stoichkov and co were born, compared to just 70,000 when the current crop were born in the 1990s and 2000s, and deteriorating health among young people and skyrocketing obesity levels, and it is hardly surprising that Bulgaria hasn't produced any footballers of real quality in an awfully long time. The extreme degradation of the Bulgarian game and the endemic corruption and match fixing hasn't just undermined the trust of Bulgarians in domestic football, but also foreigners who don't know what to believe when they scout Bulgarian players now, becoming increasingly reliant on performances at junior level with the national team, and therefore diminishing the standard of club that tends to come in for them. It is a bleak picture. There's not really any other way of putting it, and it didn't have to be like this. It is possible, even with gangsterism and massive corruption running rife, to still retain some core competencies. In fact, it's often more profitable that way. FIFA and UEFA are incredibly insidious and corrupt organisations, but they are also incredibly competent in terms of marketing, negotiating rights deals, and constantly increasing their revenue. The popularity of their competitions, therefore, continues to increase and revenues continue to rise, meaning that there is more money to go around for everyone. Dinamo Zagreb, likewise, is a great example of how a football club can be hideously corrupt off the pitch under the ownership of a common criminal and still run an outstanding academy that churns out constant talent to the benefit of the nefarious characters at the top of the organisation. Bulgarian football has had a lethal combination of all-consuming corruption and almost unimaginable incompetence, which together have conspired to take the team that finished fourth in the world in 1994 to losing at home to Lithuania, being ranked below football powerhouses like Uzbekistan and Oman, and not even being able to host games. The great irony, of course, being that many of the same people who were responsible for those successes in the 1990s have also been responsible for Bulgaria's catastrophic demise. It seems likely that Dimitar Berbatov will finally become BFU president in March, and the hope there has to be that he made too much money during his playing days to be as corrupt as Mikhailov, and won't become just yet another tarnished legend. Ultimately, though, it will take much more than a change of president. Bulgarian football requires a total clear-out. It's hard to imagine anyone in any administrative position at the BFU who hasn't been corrupted over the last 18 years, and it almost feels like abolishing the organisation altogether and refounding it with an entirely new set of staff would be the only effective solution. Bulgarian football alone cannot alter the political reality within which it exists. That much is obvious, but it can get its own house in order. It can vet owners to prevent the game from being overrun by organised crime. It can clamp down in a meaningful sense on match fixing to bring some trust and integrity back to the Bulgarian game. And it can start to take seriously youth development, as anyone who actually cared about Bulgarian football naturally would. Whether it will do any of those things, recent history doesn't inspire much confidence. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much as ever for watching. Bit of a bleak one, especially if you're Bulgarian, but an important subject nonetheless, and one that I have been asked to cover for a very, very long time. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Hit the like button if that was the case, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, make sure that you're subscribed, and have notifications turned on for both this channel, HITC Sevens, and also my backup channel, or second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with that Ludogorets video that I mentioned earlier on, and the one about the corruption in Tajikistan. As I said, there's also the video about CSK Sofia, but I can only fit two on the screen, so, you can just watch that one afterwards. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, or Threads via the username @HITC Sevens on all three, should you wish to do so. And all of those links, plus a whole lot more, because I've just bamboozled you with quite a lot there, should be down in the video description below. Cheers.